Alrighty, we are back with the three of us. I hear that today is the 30th episode of the OGX podcast. We've had lots of different podcasts, but this is the one that's really sticky, the OGX podcast. I do want to take this opportunity as I'm saying that to say that we had a little snafu with the server of our podcast, and so it got moved. So it's all still there. You can go back and listen to all the old episodes, but you probably have to resubscribe, research for us. You ended up here, so somehow you got to us. But resubscribe, follow, give us reviews, all of that. We got to kind of rebuild because we had to move the podcast a little bit. So anyways, if you made it here, congrats, you found us. And now make sure you subscribe so that you can get alerts about every week. So for today, we thought last week, Ashley and I joked, but we were obviously a little like on our snarkier side, doing a little spooky softball stuff. And so gonna kind of shift our focus a little bit more to the sort of like positive, what's going on in our world right now. We are at the beginning of November here. So our high school athletes are getting close to wrapping up their fall seasons if they haven't already wrapped them up. We have our college consulting relationships who are kind of also wrapping up some fall games and sort of what their fall season looked like. We're getting ready to start off season, and that looks different for high school and college. So there's a lot of different moving pieces. So we're just going to kind of touch on, what we're seeing and some of the things that are happening in those worlds. So I think I kick it to Ashley first to maybe talk about your conversations with the colleges we work with on a regular basis. What is kind of the focus now? What are we seeing, the shift go to? What are some of the things that they're doing at this time of year for these colleges?
Yeah. First I want to say, if I can sum up it's really interesting because we live in the youth world with individual training, and we live in the college world with consulting essentially at this time of year. And right now they're very intertwined because of recruiting. Mm-hmm. And right. So it's like everyone's tired for the same reason.
Right.
And I just think it's interesting. That is, I know we're supposed to be be your most optimistic, positive self right now, but give me 2 minutes and then I'll turn into that. But basically everyone's very tired. From a college standpoint, most of them, some are still playing some games just depending on when they decided to start. But most of them have finished their games. There's so much with recruits on campus. The fall is wild. They're trying to get to know their new athletes. They're trying to make them better. This is truly sort of an off-season time. They're trying to woo the recruits, to get them to commit. There's September 1st in the middle of all of that. And then they finally sort of take a breather after focusing on their own athletes in games, and now they're gone all weekend. I think I've seen kind of a theme across the board with most of the consulting relationships where they kind of just designate a single assistant who's been doing it, because it's just we can't do this. This is just way too much. And then during the week I have athlete calls, and they're help, basically how do I, I can tell my rise ball is getting hit more. We're getting really tired. So I'm just it is so interesting. This just stretch it out. The athletes, we have a lot of athletes in Georgia and Atlanta area, and they go till Thanksgiving. And I'm these kids, right. Their wellness questionnaires are coming in. Their level of readiness is low. So I'm it is, I know this came up at NSCA I think 2 years ago with fall recruitment.
Every year they talk about it. Yeah.
Every year.
It's been.
I just seeing the athletes and the parents, I talked to a parent was on the call with an athlete the other day. I thought he was going to cry. That's how tired he was. He's just my wife and I need a break so badly, because they live up north. And so you fly everywhere. There's school all week, they're working. I'm wow, this family is busting at the seams basically, of what they can manage. And then, on Mondays, just college coaches look exhausted from coming back from those tournaments. So I think that's interesting to just kind of see both sides of that. Everybody's struggling, and I'm is this necessary? Anyway, let's close that. That's my,
we need wellness questionnaires for our college coaches. Fill those out too.
And last week's spooky episode, I'm what I think is spooky is travel ball. Just travel ball is spooky, and that would be another reason why. But anyway, I would say the discussions now, it's really interesting. Most of the pitchers are coming back into individuals. And so there's a handful of schools where it's just these athletes just got better and better and better and better. but particularly toward like the last couple of games, each pitcher kind of had a game or two that was like, that was really kind of, we've really got to see over the course of the fall what it looks like when pitcher A is crushing, what it looks like when she's okay, and what it looks like when things are bad. And I really consider that to be a very, very positive thing, to be able to see the whole gauntlet. And I think it's really positive, not just for coaches, but for the athletes to see that as well. It's so specific. You know, obviously we can get all the way to the tier of a lot of the schools you work with have their Yakkertech, you know, in-game units, the stadium units. And so we're looking at the data and we can legitimately see like, okay, this happened last week. Actually, it was not a school that had Yakkertech, but it was scrimmages. They did like, you know, blue versus white, black versus gold, whatever. And they threw the Rapsodo down on the field. And so she was like, every single pitcher had a great performance, had like a mediocre performance, and had a bad performance, like literally every single one of them over the course of the last X amount of days. I'm like, let's pull it. And we went through and pulled up the data, and we wanted to be able to check like, okay, is it something in the data that's different? Like she literally lost X amount of break. She added horizontal to this pitch on this day that was not great. She lost that horizontal component that wasn't great. And sometimes we do see that, and it's so eye-opening of like, this really matters. You can't just go and prep and locate pitches. And for those pitchers, we saw that. I'm like, how do they make sure over break they either have a Rapsodo, like send them home with one of yours, or are they connected to a facility, a pitching coach, whoever who has one? Because it's a huge difference when this athlete loses those 2.5 inches of break, and she won't know if that's happening if we're not tracking it. So obviously in our consulting relationships, they're using our like web-based app. And so we're like, whenever we have data coming in, we can just sort of like visualize what's going on. And so we're having conversations like that. And then we're also seeing sometimes the data isn't different. And this is when I have to really rely on some data from coaches of like command wise, or I'm like, what percentage of time did you utilize this pitch? And they're like, not much. I'm like, I know, like, this is the kind of things we have to infer if we don't have in-game data like Yakkertech. I'm like, I mean, there's nothing saying that this pitch struggled today. Like, it's just not as powerful if you're not willing to pull the strings on that off-speed pitch. I know that you're not comfortable with it yet. I know she's not comfortable with it yet, but it's not as powerful without that. We have to go at it. So it kind of just depends on what the data tells us on like what could be the issue. A pitch doesn't always just get hit more because you didn't locate it well, didn't command well, or because you lost break on it. It's sometimes the supporting role pitches that aren't necessarily like doing their job. And we just kind of are like peeling back those layers. And so for a lot of schools, I'm helping kind of either I'm, you know, kind of helping like lead some of the programming, or at least, you know, we're talking about it together. Like, what should we send these athletes home with over the break? And what we're really focused is very much how I'm going to bring it back to the youth world. This is the pitching side, of course. So we're bringing it back to like, if we write 3 workouts a week, day one, what is the heart and soul of this kid? Is it a drop ball? They are literally working on drop ball. They're working on their basic patterns. They've got their plyos, and they're going on like the heart and soul of who this pitcher is their day one. Their day two is usually that heart and soul pitch and their off-speed version of it, or their main complement. And then day 3 is where we don't throw all of their pitches, but we're like, if they showed up with these 3 tools, what are they? And we're kind of working. And so what we've really been talking about is like, that's how they're going to spend November into December. Then we'll just start adding more and more. Maybe it's other pitch types. It's how well, if they switch spin direction, can this one hold? You know, like, we're really just focused now on making things as good, as strong as possible individually on their own little islands, in their own little silos. And then we start testing when we blend pitches together. Our ultimate job is to get to, our ultimate goal is to get to early February. For our high school athletes, it's early March, but with the ability to have really strong tools when you are throwing at maximum level of variability. I'm throwing to this location with this pitch, change speed, go rise, come down with a bullet drop, whatever that looks like. It's max variability, but it's baby steps to test, you know, of like how to get there. That's really the work that we're doing right now, is to lay all of that out. And so it's fun. It's really fun because it's obviously like, it's this little like chess game of like, here's the end goal. And it's this design of not just the element of periodization. Okay, at this time of year, now we got to add this. We have the data. Like basically, if we get to January with some of these pitchers, and we're like, well, we should be at the point where we're working on XYZ, but all of a sudden, like the drop falls, it goes dead. We got to go back. Like we got to go get that guy, you know? So you just have to constantly use the data to know like how you're going to go rogue on some sort of like cookie cutter periodization approach, if that makes sense. And that's the beauty of the data. It lets us individualize it like that. But it's the same for our high school athletes. We're going to give them a freaking break, probably. And their strength and conditioning is probably going to be a mess. So we're going to be like, you're going to lift, you're going to really kind of pull things back. But then we're going to get to know, in addition to their data, what they have going on. Do you have camps? You know, like in our pitching department meeting this week, we talked a lot about like the 3 different tiers of, we may have had 4 different tiers, but 3 different tiers of athletes we're programming for right now. And some are they're committed. This is the first off season they have ever been able to take an off season. There are no camps. There are no tournaments. That we program differently for them in their build up over the off season. Then we have the athletes who are, they're probably finished this upcoming weekend, right? Like early on. And so like when we have the athletes who live in like Georgia, where it starts a little bit later. And then we have the athletes who are finishing sometime in November, but they've got camps. So we have to like keep that, and we can't just like pull everything back. So there's just this like high level of individuality to like, what are we trying to get them to be in February and in March, and work it all the way back? How are we building sort of like one stepping stone after another? So that's happening in the OGX walls like every day with all of our coaches essentially right now. We're just like waiting for the off-season time to kick in. And we can't wait, because that's the beauty of player development, right?
Yeah, I was thinking though, as you were talking, because we also started laying out some off-season. For most kids, we have about 16 weeks, you know, ish. There's sometimes people go to Thanksgiving, which cuts, you know, that's kind of what we talked about, like which end of off season are you going to cut on for that kid based on how deep they go into that? So kind of, are you taking away some of the low intensity stuff and you're doing less of that? Are you taking away some of the sort of like variability at the end that you might be using to go into season? So there's some flexibility there, but it's, you know, assuming we have 16 weeks of off season, I think this first block is the part we often, it's not like so fun for us. It's not like the most fun block for the skill trainers. It's very fun for James. Like, I think he likes it a lot for strength and conditioning. It's not the most fun block, but we all like it because it's like, you know, there's just, you are on the beginning of like a different kind of journey. But I think the challenging part for the high school athletes is that the buy-in is a little hard, because this is not a way that people train. We stay at 100% intensity all the time, all year. We don't vary from what we do. And so what we see in this, usually, you know, speaking from the hitting side, and I know this is true also for pitching, but in this next like 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, however long they're going to be in this first block, there's not going to be any PRs. Exit velo is going to be down. We're doing we're only on the machine a little bit. Machine is more like drill focused. We're more on T and front toss. Intensity is down. Volume is even down. So it's not like you're not overhitting that often. And so there's really, to get buy-in, has to be this connection to the high school athletes of both, what are we going for in this block? What are the things we're trying to build right now? So, you know, we talked a lot about this is a time where we use video on the hitting side, because we are going for some like pattern things. We want to see some changes with load, and we want to show them that and give them that feedback. So video is really good during this, without getting like nuts about that, because we're also, you know, we're building towards the data and that type of thing. But that is important. And also then I think in addition, that's sort of the immediate feedback, but this being able to lay out for your athletes, what is our long-term vision in the off season? So you have to take this part really serious, because what it should set up is XYZ. We should then, when we go into that next block, be able to jump into higher velo on the machine, or maybe you're an older athlete and we can do off speed already on the machine, and we're doing mix of speeds in the next block, or whatever we're going towards. And what we typically see in hitting is that the third block, so at that like 8-week mark, is when we cut volume down and we bring intensity up. It starts to become inverse in that. And that is typically the time frame, like we laid out yesterday for hitting. And I like starred that one, because that typically is a block we all have the most fun, which is everyone's PRing. Everyone's like, I am the greatest every day. Like I PR every day, because it's typically, if they follow it's why like periodization and really looking ahead is so important, because if they follow that and they don't just exhaust themselves and they actually buy into the process, what happens at that time period is everything starts to match, right? So we're coming down in volume and everything, strength and conditioning, skill, and we're going up in intensity. So they're like jumping and doing power and strength and conditioning. Everything's matching and they're fresh. They're not getting beat up all weekend and they're not playing. And so like, it's the most fun 4 weeks. And then it's also fun to last when you start to like challenge more of like, what's in that bat look like and how we like, now we're getting variability. But typically that like third block of a 16-week program is the one where if you're really following those things, that's when you should see this. That's when we see our pitchers PR. That's when we see all of this, because everything starts matching. And I think for the athletes to really know what that journey looks like and what they should expect in it, you know, hopefully create some buy-in and you sort of lay that process out. But this idea that you are just going to be at that peak level all the time is ridiculous. And typically then it's just like leads to disappointment because you never get there because you're striving at this high. But it is the understanding that that first off-season block is for the high school athletes. If they haven't done that before, or they don't know that process, or they haven't done any like periodization or something, it feels like boring, or they want to just shut down and then ramp back up. And we're like, you don't need to shut down, but like it is this kind of more lower intensity. Let's get the foundation built. Let's get restarted what we're doing. And what I will say too is I actually think we have so many athletes now who are bought in that we actually haven't seen these massive, like I've been pretty like optimistic and surprised, I think, about our movement quality right now, as just generally with our athletes. We have a lot of athletes bought in, and even though they're in the middle of these fall seasons, they've got school and they have all this, that we aren't really seeing this like big tank. We're seeing some people that say they're tired, that feel tired, but like we're not seeing just like they're falling off the table with their ability to have stability and stuff, which is really exciting. But it doesn't mean you change the approach, because now we're just like, we're starting at an even higher place, which is amazing, to start to build the base in the off season. And so that goal is when you're 8 weeks in, that we start hitting PRs that are higher than last off season. You know, that's the goal that we're building towards, so that we elevate where we're going. So that's kind of the approach we take across the board. And that's what periodization looks like. Obviously, if you get to that mark and you're not hitting PRs, or you're not starting to see that, that's kind of what you're talking about, which is the flexibility of like, what's going on here, you know, and there's a lot of checkpoints along the way of why you might, when you might even realize you're on the wrong track faster than that. We have so many checkpoints for that, but that's kind of the goal of the off season. So I think it's just exciting because you're not competing. Sometimes you are multiple sports
it's
and things
player
like that, but you're
like,
not competing.
It's the time for player development, but this is where camps get tricky. Like this is not a like, damn you college coaches for having camps. I get it. That's why they do it. But like, think about it, when you're like, this kid really needs XYZ this off season, but she has camps all throughout December, January. It's really hard because she's going to go there and they're going to be looking at velo, all the things you just said. It's like when you are going for a player development approach, when you're trying to get better year after year, but you spend the off season in camps, you choose one over the other. That's just reality. You choose like that I'm going to try to show a peak performance in January.
Right. Because what we're saying is that when you are in that first block that I'm describing, you take everything down in intensity and you focus on strength and conditioning, you will be down in numbers, period. Right. You're not going to go to camp and just then pop your best numbers. Like it just doesn't, you're taking your body and your training down a notch, and you will be down in numbers. So if you cannot sacrifice that, and sometimes you can't, then you don't get the opportunity to have that, which is, it is a massive miss for what you're able to do, but sometimes you can't do that. Which I think goes to, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, some of our athletes, then their junior year, they commit, and the conversations we have, which is like, you got 2 years now where we can take the right approach. Like we got to go for the right stuff, which is actually having an off season that looks the way we want it to look, because we're not panicking anymore about recruiting and we're not having to do those things, and really prepping for that. And I think it's still a little mixed of the response to, once I commit, what should it look like? We have plenty of athletes who are like, yes, I'm so excited. Like I totally see how now this is my path and I'm going to do this and I'm going to make sure I don't overdo it. I'm going to do all these things. And we have some athletes that treat it almost like it's the end. I think that's what we were kind of saying. It's just like, I'm committed, and that all the work was about that. And now that's over. And so I'm going to kind of like pull back from all this work I'm doing. And that for us is
I'm
like,
sorry. I'm just laughing because every time we get an alert, we have like a system alert that says like if an athlete is stopping, we have to know, obviously not to like read their programs, and we ask for the reason, right? And like, listen, there's all kinds of reasons why, just like, but when the reason says like, I committed to college, so I'm stopping training, I'm like, that is the ultimate oxymoron. I don't even understand. Could you have lied? Like, that's what I'm saying. I wish you would have said, like, you're the worst. I would be less offended by if someone was like, you're terrible. We hated working with you, which obviously we don't usually get, right? But it's more of like some logistical thing. But we're committed, so we're not going to train anymore. I'm like, dude, I hope your college coach doesn't know this. That as soon as you said yes to them, you're going to stop working on yourself?
That is probably the single, in the last few weeks, probably the single most, for me, from the health and wellness side, the single most important conversation I think I've had between sales calls, between assessments of new athletes who are committed to programs we currently work with, and who then are taking advantage of, well, we work with you at the college level, why wouldn't we also want our pitchers to have a leg up, or our athletes, et cetera, too, to have a leg up coming into us? So we're getting these athletes, I love it, that are like, I've committed to this school, and now they recommended that I come here so that I can get familiar with these systems. And I'm like, beautiful. Your job, and I wish I could do like a zoom in right now, but like I am talking to the pitchers specifically. Your job is to protect your health for the next 2 years. That is your number one priority, is to protect your health so that you can improve your performance, so that you can do all of the incredibly detailed and thoughtful things that Ashley's talking about with these different blocks and going after what you do really well and growing these, complementary pitches. You have to be healthy to do that. And it's a conversation I've had multiple times in the last few weeks that it's really resonated with me. I get a little fired up about it when I talk to an athlete, and I'm so proud of athletes that are prioritizing that, whether it is establishing healthy boundaries about not being overthrown, whether it is parents who are supporting those athletes, setting up healthy boundaries. We all know that our worst fear is for a pitcher specifically to go to her high school team and be the only pitcher, because we know she's going to come out of that just beat up. I mean, there is no other way to say it. She's going to be beat up. And so even from let's monitor, let's just give you, minimum effective dose of strength and conditioning. Let's talk about low intensity pitching. It does not mean you have to, go full in like you do in the off season, but you better be doing something during that high school season to help you, to support you, because yes, you are committed, but it's not going to mean a whole lot if you can't arrive to campus healthy. And there are a number of times we saw that with the colleges that we worked with. These, pitchers came out of, whether it was summer season or it started all the way back in March in high school season. Mm-hmm. It's a problem, and that getting to campus healthy it's critical. And so that's a conversation I've had a number of times in the last few weeks. It's important.
There's a reason that sophomores in high school don't pitch against freshmen in college. They're not as good. Like I
was just going to say that, Krista. I'm like, definitely protect your health, but also let's just be clear: the overwhelming majority of time when you get recruited, you're not ready yet. Mm-mm. You are not ready.
You're not the best version of yourself.
Scale
no.
Yet. Mm-mm. And so basically, like there's a lot of performance gaps that have to get closed for you to get on campus and be ready. And so that's where it's also like
it's like right. So it's this combination of like you're having success still, because what you do now at this age works. So you could just ride that success, not really train, overthrow, and you're a hurt and the same version of yourself. That's worst case scenario. And we do see that all the time.
I would say arguably a worse version of yourself, not even the same version.
Totally, because you're hurt. Yeah. Right. And then and we see that all the time. And then everyone is like, what happened? It's like, well, it's not that surprising what happened. Like, And then the other version is like, okay, you could say, I need to get to campus healthy, but you also need to get to campus better. Mm-hmm. And so it's this combination of like, you can't throw 64 bullet if you're going to a Power 5 and showing up, like yes, that works in travel ball, but that doesn't work when you get there. So every year that you have this time that you're going, you need to keep trying to get better if your goal is to walk on campus and to contribute. And I think this idea of like, I got recruited because I'm good enough to play. It's like, as a sophomore in high school, like that doesn't even, no, you got recruited because you're
potential.
Good for a sophomore in high school. Potential. And so the scalability is there, right? The likelihood of the scalability is there, but not that this version of yourself is going to go perform against those versions. Like, I think of some of the best kids we've had. If I compared them, they're like sophomore into beginning of junior year, to now what they look like in college, I mean, their build is totally different. They're like, everything is totally different. So you just keep getting better and better. You don't go, and like, we see this, like the teams in the World Series, the best pitchers in the country in the college level, then go play like Team Canada and get hammered, because then at the next stage, you're not good enough. And we're like, well, these are the best pitchers, but they go play grown women who've been playing internationally for a while who kill them. They just like absolutely hammer them. So you're never as good as where you're going. And so there's always this like strive for that. And so I think there's just so much pressure and emphasis on the recruiting. Mm-hmm. People just, the amount, and this goes back to other episodes where we said this, but like everyone is like, we just want it to be done. Yeah. And, we've said this like 1,000 times. It's not done. It's not like, we don't even go there a lot of times. Now, sometimes people commit their senior year and things, but like, you're not even going there for 1 year. And then you have 4, sometimes more, depending on what happens there, years at that school. Like, there's so much more still ahead of you. And so I think it's this combination, we talk about this a lot with training. I think it's even what I was just saying about the off season. It's this combination of, can you learn to focus on the now and be present in a training session, be present in your high school season, be present in whatever the like Zoomed version that you're in, like this pitch. Can I be present in this game? Can I go try to win this state title? Because that, that competitiveness and that desire to do that is a great piece of you. But also, can you not lose sight during those moments of the longevity that's required and where you're going and this bigger picture thing? And that combination of the two is so important. And so it's why this periodization concept and this conversation of like, what does this 12 months look like? What does next 12 months look like? How does all of this time period? The amount of times I think I like have used this quote, it's like you overestimate what you can do in a year and you underestimate what you can do in 5. And it's like so true. It's what we talk to, college coaches that have done the best with their pitching staffs and stuff. It's like in a year, maybe the goal, that's the process or how much they've improved. It seems not as big as maybe you were thinking. They didn't add 7 inches to a pitch or something. They didn't add 8 miles per hour to velo. But when you look at that compounding over time, if that athlete stays in the right trajectory and stays healthy, they came in throwing 64 and they walk out throwing 74. And that's a real journey that people can take if you have this like combination of factors. Like, what is going to make this athlete successful this year? How far can we get in this off season? And then how do we keep compounding that over time? And that's what you should be thinking about. And it's hard. There's no judgment. It's hard to have that mindset. It's not how our brains work a lot of times, to think, long-term reward instead of the short-term reward. But that's the hard thing. It's just like, it's literally just beginning. And when you think of it that way, it's very free. Like, it's just beginning. Okay, I'm a junior and I got 2 years. I get to be in the driver's seat a little more. I'm not panicking about things. I can have the off season look like how I want. I can do all of these things. And it, I think for the athletes that approach it like that, it's a really exciting time period. And it's a lot of times where we see like the most growth when they can approach it in that way.
It kind of reminds me when we have athletes come for assessment who are juniors and we give them all this, like, they'll be like, we don't know why, like, our teammates got committed to XYZ and like, we just don't have, and they come and it's so obvious. It's like, you only have this. This is not like, tell me the schools you were thinking would go for you. I'm like, these are not tools that would scale there. And so they'll say things like, oh, we should have come here sooner. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say junior year, yeah, would it be better to start as a freshman and sophomore in the player development process than junior? Yes, of course. But I'm like, talk about better late than never. Your college career hasn't even started. you're about to essentially 2 years from your collegiate career even starting, like have a deep understanding of what you have access to, how to maximize it. So kind of depends on the lens you're looking at. Like they're like,
right. Well, we
over.
also just had
like,
a pitcher a few pitchers who are seniors who started junior year and who are at peak performance right now for the first time. They are hitting velos they've never hit. Their break is better than ever. And they felt going into this fall season panicky. Like I don't have any offers. And college coaches will come up and be like, we're not really looking. And then they watch the kid who's performing now and has stuff that works. And they're like, never mind, we'll sign up for a call on Tuesday. Like it's never too late. I just think like you're like, I think there's a difference between like, oops, I made a mistake, or that was a bad rep, or I went a little too overboard with training, or I thought this was going to work and it didn't. I went down the wrong rabbit hole for a little bit. Like I that journey and the like regrets about never going all in and doing that approach. I think what you're trying to avoid is like, if you just try to become the best version of yourself as often as possible, and you really dive into that, I think it works out. Like, not to sound like super rosy colored, but I think recruiting, I have yet to see an example where I'm like, that really didn't work out for that kid. The kids that do that, even when it's later, they find some home that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of times, maybe they ended up walking on somewhere. But a lot of times those kids, what we see is they earn money because they're on the right track. They just started a little late. And so because they have the right approach, then, their journey sort of unfolds in the way it should have, maybe just like a year delayed, or something like that. So I just think you got to take that approach and this like chasing and sort of like really randomly and throwing darts at a board and not really like going all in, or not wanting to sort of face reality or whatever, all the different things that play into it. It just backfires. It's not like a good approach to anything. It doesn't work for softball, but it also like doesn't work for life, not to tie it to things. But I think that's the approach.
I think it's an important piece of, we talk about like coming to us as a junior. Okay. Technically, would we love to have them earlier? Yes, exactly. Just as you said, Ash, like we would love to have them earlier, but I still, when I am talking to potential clients, I'm still saying very clearly, because they'll ask sometimes about recruiting services, and we don't have a formal recruiting service. It's not something we've ever pursued. It's not something that, has been a product that we put together. But what I find myself saying is there is such turnover and turmoil right now with college coaching in general, set softball aside, just in general, right? In college athletics. And so if you are coming, to us as a junior, let's say for a biomechanics assessment, those 2 years that you're spending before you even get to campus, you're making an assumption that coach that recruited you is still going to be there in 2 years. And we've seen those changes happen, right? Those shifts happen. And so you go to, okay, then who am I? Because that's the story that stays constant, right? Is your develop, it's never done. It's a constant journey. And so if you are hinging your pitching worth, your hitting worth, your player worth on this college coach's opinion of you, and that coach all of a sudden is no longer at the school you wanted to go to, whose truth are you believing, right? Who are you believing about yourself? And I find so much value in that conversation when we have that biomechanics assessment, when we're using data constantly to train. It becomes so much easier to not have these mismatches of, well, my teammates were getting recruited to Power Fives and I wasn't. And then we see them as sometimes a senior. And we're like, that's clear. It's clear why that wasn't happening for you. And they say, we wish we had found you sooner. That's okay. It's not too late, but it's also super important that you at least understand that about yourself right now. Because if you go to that same school and that new coach is there, they don't know your story. They didn't recruit you. And so that becomes really important for you to know who the heck you are as a player, so that you have that consistent point, even if your coach is, above you, around you, if they shift. And I think that the recruiting side and transfer portal stuff, all of that gets a little less complicated when the athlete knows who the heck they are.
Well, also like YooHoo and LI is going away. So it's just like, we've said these things, again, in other episodes, we talked about this, but the world of like I'm committing here. We're all going to honor that. And that's what it looks like. And,
but we're moving to an employee type relationship where there are standards.
To that point. Right. So like be in charge of it. That's the powerful thing about this, right? It's like the more empowered you are, the more education you have, the more understanding of you, the more understanding of how you can contribute to a staff and be the best version of yourselves, and or be in the lineup hitting, and what that looks like, and what you need. Like you're really trying to put a level of like maturity and education in these teenagers, which is tough, but as they go into that decision, because the relationship and the dynamic is shifting of what it looks like. And you can't just make assumptions of, now I'm done my junior year. It's like, well, you guys kind of made like a promise to each other that really is becoming less and less of a binding promise. And so on both sides, this isn't just like, and then the coaches are like screwing people over. The athletes also are, they want that. They don't want to be stuck in something if their circumstances change. It's less of a binding thing, and even more of a reason, not that that's why you should do it, because you should just do it because you want to be the best version of yourself, because you're competitive and you're an athlete. But it's another reason of like, don't just make assumptions about what your journey is going to look like, that you're going to go there and you're going to have this spot and it's going to look this way and you're going to get paid this and you're going to do that. The more and more we're shifting to this more like amateur professional type model, the more and more it's like your performance and your health have to be there. And if not, you won't get paid and you won't be on the team and you won't get all these things. Like in the same way that, an MLB person who was the first round pick, but then goes and never performs. They're not like, but I was a first round pick. They're like, don't care. It's not good enough now. It just doesn't work like that. You have to keep getting better and keep elevating yourself. So I think
this is just like, we're not a camp. You don't just like check in and then we're like, send your data somewhere and then that gets you recruited. Player development is not a camp. Player development is this ongoing journey. And I think it's just particularly hard. I don't know if you guys noticed, but in one of our last like team meetings where you said, like, we said such and such, this athletes, like, we're not programmed for them anymore. They like stopped training. And James was like, oh, why? Because he doesn't like know he's still new in the softball world. And we're like, because they committed. Did you guys catch his face? Like, like he literally just was like, well, that's obviously not what you meant. I'm misunderstanding. But because we know the world of like, I committed. That's what I'm going for. I got the Twitter post out there. And so I think like, especially like when I'm thinking about my lens in the college consulting world, it's like, these are the athletes that are already there. And we are squeezing every little detail we can to maximize these athletes. Like we are squeezing like what I just said when we started this podcast. Okay, why wasn't she as successful in this game versus this game? Was it the pitch? Was it the command? Was it this? Was it this amount of break? How do we get this? Can we add this pitch? Like we're doing that same process. So it's such an advantage for athletes to go into school, no matter whether their coaches are doing that, but maybe even especially if their coaches are not doing that for them in the future, but for them to know how to do that themselves. So it's just kind of like this idea of, I want to be all in on player development. I want to maximize who I am. And then I just want to take a break. And it's like, don't want to maximize myself anymore. And not just like pick it up when we get there. It's wild. I think to myself, like, like I wish I could have a conversation with them of like, this isn't about us. This is not a good idea for you, right? This is not a good idea, because sometimes when it's even at a school, it doesn't matter. At this point, we see so many schools and so much data. We know exactly what tools scale at what level. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if we work with your school that you're going to and we see what the other athletes on that staff are going to. This is just easy for us to do at this point. And so I think it's just, it's really this major moment of like, man, this is where like probably what got prioritized in your decision is travel ball success. As long as you're having success in travel ball, you think you're good. And the external pressure, which I feel for athletes these days, we had nothing like this, but this external pressure. I have had legitimate conversations on Zoom, one-on-one with athletes. And they were like, I just didn't think the schools that called me on September 1st were like, I know I can be more than that. I'm like, then wait. Let your performance and your max performance, your max for now, obviously, dictate your timing. Let that dictate your timing, then wait. And they're like, okay, I'm going to wait because like, I know I can be more than this. I'm like, okay. And then like the next weekend I see their post. I'm like, damn it. You know, like they caved. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's their decision. Maybe they were like, no, I loved it there, which is cool. You don't always have to choose the school that's like the highest level of, you know, whether it's division, conference, whatever. But I just heard from that athlete that they're like, this is like, I believe that I can be somewhere bigger. But they just were like, I got to do it. I have to get it off my chest. I have to be done with it. I'm like, that sucks. You know? And so of course I'm like, congratulations. Let's get to work. Let's be the best version of you no matter where you're going. But there is a part of me in the back that's like, I know you were telling me the truth last week when you were like, they just couldn't bear the weight because that external pressure, when everyone's got their Twitter posts, you know, let's maybe not turn this into an episode where social media is destroying the world. We'll save that for another time. But it is so hard for these kids, you know? It's so hard for these kids to just like take on that external, I see what everyone else is doing. And so I'm literally making a huge decision. I'd rather just get it done over with and it not be the best decision for me. And I think like when we've told stories like the Lauren Skirmans of the world, you know, when we told these stories of like you said, Iowa State of like we had to like beg her, like you're on the cusp of turning into something big, like big. Do not say yes to XYZ. Not because, oh, those schools are not like, it's just, we knew she was going to say yes to those schools just to check the box. I'm done. I don't think that's necessarily the best fit, but I need to check the box. And, you know, that was scary. We were like asking for her like trust and to like, wait. And when she did, it obviously paid off for her. But like, those are why those stories are special. I understand why that is so difficult for athletes, but I would be lying if I said it didn't kind of break a little bit on my heart when I see them like, you know, the big Twitter post. I'm like, man, that post is for everyone else.
It's for everyone else.
It just stinks, you know? And like, talk about connecting softball to life. It's just like, I understand there's a lot of pressure on parents too, but you know, like, I don't know, all those people that are waiting for your Twitter post, they don't care about you in like 3 years. When you're in the heart of your college career, they don't care. And if they do care, you don't care they care. You know, it's just like, it's so hard. It's just like, don't do that for someone else. Just stay in your own journey.
They're going to criticize you for being in the portal when that first year doesn't work out the way you wanted it to. Like, you're going to get criticism regardless. So you might as well stay true to what you want.
Yeah, just like keep looking at exactly who you are and the player development process. The reason we all love it so much is we watch kids transform. You know, we watch careers transform both at the high school and the college level. We watch careers get saved because of injury and all kinds of stuff. And it's just like, just keep staring at the truth of who you are and just keep staying focused. You know, my John Tobar line, that's my dad's line of like, just look in the mirror. Looking when something is just not quite right, it doesn't matter who's accountable. If you only think that you're accountable and you're in charge of getting to where you want to be, that's when you get exactly where you want to be. And I think of like, I'm always so grateful that I was like raised with information like that. And I think it would have been a hell of a lot harder in the world of like Twitter announcements. So I get it, or X, whatever the hell, you know, but I get it. I just think like, you know, it is hard to watch that happening on the youth level and then have the other foot in the college level where I'm like, these athletes that are playing in your level are better than you right now, as they should be. And we're still pulling for every little bit. Like the athletes don't see that at the high school level. You know, they just don't see that.
Right.
So listen to this episode and then see that. See that, everyone. See it.
Can't unsee it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next week, go find this. You're here. So subscribe so that you get the alerts now for where the new podcast is. Write a review so other people find us, all of the good stuff that helps us out. And then we will see you next week.